The United States is right now in a great internal conflict where there's populism of the left and populism of the right, which reflects great wealth and values differences. So you have to look at the population to understand why we have the candidates and the parties that we have. And so as we come into this period of time, by populism, it's a win at all cost mentality, not a compromise mentality. Compromise is considered a sign of weakness. And so there's a question about whether we're going to have an orderly transition of power. The first question, do we have an orderly transition of power? We're not sure that you're going to have that. That's an amazing thing, right? You have to go back in history to see something like that. Of course, it's repeated many times in history. So if you have an orderly transition of power, you're also going to see this fragmentation and the questioning of whether the system is fair and appropriate, such as the questioning of the Supreme Court, questioning these different values. The differences in the values go down to matters like how do you raise your children related to issues of sexuality? Do you allow a 10-year-old to decide what sex they are? These are not compromisable questions. And so you see that kind of environment. You see a deterioration in infrastructure and so on that is causing people to go to different states. During such times of great conflict, it is normally the case that you have the powerful autocratic leader and a fight, and then you enter into periods of reform. So if we go into China, there's unity when you're fighting the war against Japan, and then there's a civil war, and then there's a winner of the war, and then there's dealing with the opposition of that dynamic. Donald Trump is a manifestation of the condition in the country in terms of that populism. So I think if there was not a Donald Trump, there would be something that's equivalent to that. Donald Trump has a classic type of economic policy that we've seen, particularly in the 1930s, such as in Germany, which is a protectionist, nationalist, isolationist policy in which you establish great tariffs. Tariffs are an effective way of raising tax money, by the way. Roughly speaking, if you did his promises, and I did the calculations, if China was increased to 60% and there was a 20% across the board elsewhere tariffs, that would raise about $800 billion a year, which it's quite a bit of money. And then with that protectionist, then there's the investing in the country and the building up of things in a, that kind of a way. You can imagine what it means company by company. If you're in an internal company and you're getting protectionism, you're going to benefit in terms of now all of a sudden you're getting the competition. Of course it means inefficiency on a global basis, so that it means that the amount of money that's going to, the costliness of goods is going to be a problem. But there's a view that that tariff money will also be a form of taxation. Where are you going to get the money to deal with our very big deficit? The deficit situation is a big number. So are you going to get it from taxes? Where are you going to get the money? And that's part of a class warfare thing. So that idea of getting the tax money and get from that source, even though it's inflationary, you could say that taxes is a type of inflation, in a sense, for those who pay it. So there's very much a capitalist, socialist, left-right thing going on. And so, of course, if you're on the other side and you're dependent about exporting to the United States, then that's going to be a problem. There's a sequence of how this transpires all the time throughout history. What happens is creation of credit gives buying power. It also creates debt. One man's debts are another man's assets. What do you do when you have too much debt? At the end of the day, when you have too much debt, there's either a default or there's a debt monetization, that the central bank takes money and prints the money, and makes it easier to pay back the debt. In all cases through history, including the Great Depression, they print the money, which then has its consequences. It just took longer in the Great Depression. 1929, it took them until 1933. March of 1933, they break the link with gold and they print the money. So that is going to create the dynamic. That means holding bonds. What is a bond? It is a promise to receive all that money, and it can produce much more inflation. So that's the dynamic. That's what's going to happen. So how do you bring the debt down? First, you have to do a debt restructuring of some form. In other words, there's too much debt, can't pay it all back. Some of it has to be marked down, and it's got to be cleaned off the balance sheets. When you clean it off the balance sheets and you mark it down because one man's debts are another man's assets, that means that somebody's going to get hurt by that process. But it's deflationary, that act in and of itself. But it's necessary to get it off the balance sheet and cleaned up. The other way you can get the debt down is you produce more money and you make it easier to pay the debt, but that's inflationary. So what I call a beautiful deleveraging is when that's done in a balanced way. Because one way or another, you have to get the debt burdens down. And that means a certain amount of deflationary getting them down by doing a debt restructuring, and a certain amount of inflationary so that they balance and then you get the debts down is the best way of doing that. China now has a debt crisis it has to go through. China has, because it's denominated in its currency, and they have the capabilities of doing it because it's a very politically challenging thing because you determine whose wealth it is. It's a very challenging thing. They have the capacity to do that. And I believe they have the willingness to do that. That's being demonstrated by policies. So I think they have the capacity to do that. But, we're at that point. I think the changes that are taking place are terrific changes, but you still have to do the debt restructuring to get it. It's particularly challenging because of a few other things that are going on in China. First, the local government debt is a problem. That's not a central government debt. And the local governments were getting money by selling real estate and borrowing a lot of money from other companies in their areas. So how do you get them money and not have it wasted? And I think it's something like 83% of government spending is local government spending, so it has a big effect on there. So in one way or another, that's a difficult structure to deal with. The second issue that they have to deal with is the tax issue. The tax system hasn't developed as effectively, and so there's not as an effective income tax, there's not a real estate tax and different types of taxes. So you need that, there's tax reform, which is being now undertaken. And then, of course, there's an issue with the low retirement age and the aging population. The average age of retirement, the real age of retirement, is 53 in China. A 53-year-old lives till 84. So that means there's 31 years of care that needs to be taken, and it's a financial issue. So these are issues for reform. China has the capacity to do it. Like, as I say, I went and started in 1984. Since I went in 1984, per capita income has increased by 29 times. The life expectancy's increased by 10 years. The poverty rate, hunger poverty rate's gone from 88% to less than 1%. Tremendous results. So there's the capability of dealing with great challenges, and there's a great force there. The real issue is getting to these things and creating those reforms. In terms of the internal conflict, it's more orderly, but it's, there are elements there. In terms of nature, I think, and how it's dealing with it, if you study the dynasties all through it, droughts, floods, and pandemics have been a big influence. However, they've made great progress in dealing with it, but still it's a big issue. And of course, the great power conflict that we're talking about is an issue. And then in technology, they're making fabulous progress. So there are many different technologies. But it really is quite remarkable the progress in almost all of those technologies. There are only the United States and China as effectively in dealing with technologies that are at the best level. So I won't run down the list of it, but there'll be a list of a number of technologies where China is a bit superior, some that the United States is a bit superior, and those are going to have a big effect. For example, let's say in China. China is encountering protectionism in the United States and Europe, but it's a fabulous manufacturing country. 33% of the world's manufacturing is from China, which is more than the United States, Japan, and Germany combined. And including new technologies, chips, they may not be the most high-level chips, but they're very powerful chips in manufacturing is very effective. And also, 85% of the world's population is in the third world. And so to be able to go to the third world and compete in the third world is a very viable strategy. So I think you're seeing these things play out throughout history, and now more than ever. Technology is the source of great power economically and militarily. So yes, it has a huge effect, and now more than ever. I think that we're in a world where there's this nationalism and conflict, isolationism, the things that we talk about. And at the same time, in terms of vibrancy, that these forces of containment within countries and zones are fighting against a flourishing of deal-making and economic activity all around. So there's more deals that are going on. You'll as likely have somebody from any country be all looking at the same deals than ever before. So the force economically of globalization is still a very big, powerful force going on while there's these governments that are trying to contain it. So it's at odds. I think the question really is, for the world, for each country, is almost can you rise above it and find the way of harmony? In the world today, we have a higher living standard, more wealth, more conditions that are beneficial as a whole. And our real challenge is how we are with each other. And so I think that there's the ability to have a multipolar world, but history has tended to show that sequentially you have a war because who is in control, and then they fight over who is in control. And then after that war, you have a period of peace because nobody wants to go into war again. They learn what the hell is of a war. And then you also have the fact that you then can deal well with each other. You have a dominant power, it's easier to follow. The global system of like the United Nations, WTO, and so on have always proven less effective or ineffective because of the dominance of a power. So I wouldn't be optimistic in terms of us moving toward a multipolar world as being the next part of this sequence. There are the two countries at wars, and there's a winner and there's a loser, and then there's a neutral country, those that don't get involved. If you look at histories through wars, the winners lose. They get themselves in debt. Britain is a good example. It gets itself deeply in debt, and it weakens itself. The winners lose. The losers are annihilated. And the real winners are the neutral countries. So if you really watch that pattern, you're seeing flourishing of capital markets, of talent, and so on, to those neutral countries, in which there's the basics are fundamentally. The basics are very simple. There are three types of basics, or maybe I can extend it to the big five that you're referring to. But first, the financial. In a country, well, I use these to judge where I'm going to invest. Do they earn more than they spend, so they have a good income statement and a good balance sheet? Are they financially safe and good? Second, internal. Do they have good internal order where people work together and they're productive. They educate people well and they're productive. And so now you have an effective society, or are at each other's throats and they're having at odds a great conflict. And third, are they at risk of a war or being involved with the war or not? But you can carry that to the other parts of the five, and say climate. Climate is a big issue. So acts of nature, as I say. And so are they going to be significantly affected by climate? And that's going to be costly. And number five is, where are they in technology? Are they technologically innovative and part of that curve? Because the world is now polarizing. Like, if you have those five on your side, and particularly, let's say, technology, you're savvy, you have the access to the tools, that's going to make a giant difference in the outcomes. So I look at, let's say, those five, the big five as I call them, I look at those five things, I rate those by countries. That can pretty much tell you who the winners and losers will be.